Ever feel like you need a secret decoder just to understand what's going on with hormones?
Yeah, done.
Like it's this big mystery.
Mm-hmm.
Well, today we're going to try to clear up some of that. We're doing a deep dive on natural bioidentical hormones and oral contraceptives.
Right.
And, people use these terms all the time like they're the same thing,
Yeah.
but they're really not.
Not at all, no.
So we really wanted to dig into that today. And one of the things I thought was really interesting from the research that you shared
Okay.
is this idea that what's considered a normal hormone level, like when you go get your blood tested,
Yeah.
it might not actually be the optimal level for you.
Totally. Yeah. That's a great point.
It's like finding out you've been wearing the wrong shoe size your whole life.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
It's so true. And so often we look at lab results like they're black and white,
Right.
when in reality, those ranges are just based on averages, not what's ideal for each person.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's start by breaking down some definitions. What exactly are natural bioidentical hormones?
Okay, so think of it like a lock and key.
Mm-hmm.
That's essentially how bioidentical hormones work.
Mm-hmm.
They are chemically identical to the hormones that your body naturally makes.
Okay.
So they fit perfectly into your receptors.
So it's all about that perfect match.
Exactly. Think of it like this: our bodies naturally produce hormones, but sometimes they need a little help, a little boost.
Okay.
Just like you might need extra vitamin D from the sun or supplements.
Right.
That's kind of where bioidentical hormones come in. And just like with vitamins,
Mhm.
the dosage and the delivery method, those things are really important to get right.
That makes total sense. Now, how do oral contraceptives fit into all of this? Because those use hormones too, right?
They do.
Yeah.
They do. But here's the key difference. Oral contraceptives use synthetic hormones. They're not natural.
Okay.
So while they are effective for preventing pregnancy,
Right.
the way they're made up chemically and how they actually work in the body is very different from natural hormones.
It's like comparing a real handwritten letter to one of those generic Valentine's Day cards you buy at the store.
Exactly.
They're both delivering a message, but the impact is completely different.
Yes, that's a great way to put it.
And so that's why it's so misleading to think of all hormones as being the same.
Yeah.
Just because they fall under this big umbrella of hormone, it doesn't mean they're all doing the same thing in your body.
Right. Yeah, they're definitely not all created equal.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about oral contraceptives. Um, we know that they're used for preventing pregnancy. They can help manage menstrual symptoms. But what about the potential downsides?
Right.
Because we received a lot of research on that.
Yeah, and you're right. There are benefits, but it's really important to be aware of the potential side effects too.
Yeah.
We were talking a whole range of things here. Like you might get some weight gain, mood swings. Those are pretty common.
Mm-hmm.
But then there are also more serious risks, like blood clots.
Right.
And some studies even suggest there might be long-term consequences.
Right, like an increased risk for certain health conditions, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And I know a couple of the things that came up in the studies that you shared were Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis.
Yeah.
And that's kind of alarming to me.
Yeah, it's definitely something to be aware of. And it's not just those conditions.
Right.
Oral contraceptives can also impact other specific hormones in your body,
Yeah.
like testosterone, DHEA, or DHEA is how some people say it, and estrogen.
Okay, so let's talk about a couple of those. Let's talk about testosterone and DHEAS. Why are those important? Especially for women, because I think a lot of times people think of testosterone as a male hormone. Like
Yeah.
that's a very male thing.
It's a common misconception for sure.
Yeah.
And, yes, testosterone is crucial for men,
Okay.
but it's equally important for women.
Yeah.
It plays a huge role in energy levels, your libido, muscle mass, even things like cognitive function.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
So it's kind of like this powerhouse hormone for everybody.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then you've got DHEAS, which is actually like an ingredient
Oh, wait.
that your body uses to make testosterone, among other hormones.
Interesting.
You can kind of think of it as the raw material for hormone production.
Mhm.
So when your DHEAS levels are off, it can disrupt your whole hormonal balance, like it throws the whole symphony off.
Right, like one instrument is missing, and so the whole thing sounds weird.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is where understanding the nuances of estrogen also becomes really important.
Okay, so estrogen, it's obviously about a lot more than just reproduction.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
What else does it impact?
It's involved in so many aspects of a woman's health:
Mhm.
bone density, heart health, brain function, even how elastic your skin is.
Wow.
It really does a lot.
So going back to this idea of natural versus synthetic, what's the difference when it comes to the types of estrogen?
So estradiol, that's the most potent form of estrogen your body produces naturally.
Okay.
It's the star of the show.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have ethinyl estradiol, which is the synthetic version, and that's what's in a lot of oral contraceptives.
Okay.
It mimics some of what estradiol does,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't act identically in the body, and it may come with some drawbacks.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's not a perfect substitute.
So even within the same hormone family, there are these really important distinctions.
Exactly.
We also got some research about estriol. What's up with estriol? What makes it so special? Especially for women over 40.
Estradiol is interesting. A lot of people don't even really know about it,
Yeah.
but it's actually much gentler than other estrogens
Okay.
and has some really unique benefits, especially for women as they get older. Like it can protect against osteoporosis,
Oh, wow.
help manage hot flashes,
Mm-hmm.
and even support vaginal health.
That's incredible. You know, it makes me wonder, reading through all this research, if it's so great, why isn't estriol included in oral contraceptives?
That's a great question.
Especially for women who are over 40, right?
Right, and it's because the synthetic estrogens that are in some of those birth control pills,
Yeah.
they might actually get in the way of your body's natural production of estriol.
Oh, so it's another example of how taking those synthetic hormones can actually mess with what your body's doing naturally.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. And that kind of reminds me of another point that I saw come up in the research, which is that these standard lab ranges for hormone levels,
Yeah.
they might not tell the whole story.
Yeah, it's so true. We get so caught up in what's normal.
Right.
But what's considered normal
Yeah.
is really just based on an average, right?
Right.
It doesn't mean it's optimal for you as an individual.
Yeah. It's like saying everybody should wear a size medium shirt. It just doesn't make sense.
Exactly.
So if the standard ranges aren't always accurate, how do we figure out what's best for our bodies?
Right.
Especially given that everybody's so different.
You're totally right.
Yeah.
It's really about recognizing that we're all unique. And so what works for one person might not work for another person.
Exactly.
And that's where this whole idea of personalized medicine comes in,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to something as complex as hormones.
Absolutely. So how do we actually find a healthcare provider who understands that, who gets this idea of a personalized approach, especially when it comes to hormones?
Right.
Because I think a lot of people are probably listening right now thinking, yeah, that makes sense. But then they're like, well, I go to my doctor and they don't
Right.
seem to get that.
You're right. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It really is.
Because it's about finding somebody who will really listen to you as
Ugh.
an individual,
Right.
who's going to
Oh.
take the time to actually understand what's going on with you, what your health history's been,
Yeah.
and somebody who's not going to just dismiss your symptoms
Yes.
as being normal just because they fall within those standard ranges on a lab test.
It's like finding a detective for your hormones, right?
Exactly. I love that analogy.
Someone who's going to dig deep and actually figure out what's going on.
Totally. They're going to get to the root of the problem
Yeah.
instead of just throwing some kind of generic solution at you.
And speaking of root causes, one of the things that I was really fascinated by
Okay.
in the research that you sent over was this potential connection between oral contraceptives and gut health.
Yeah.
You know, because it seems kind of counterintuitive
Yeah.
that a pill that you would take for one aspect of your health could then have these ripple effects somewhere else in your body.
Well, and it all comes back to this idea that our bodies are incredibly interconnected.
Yeah.
It's not like everything's happening in isolation.
Yeah.
What affects one system can definitely have downstream effects on other parts of the body.
Right.
And there's more and more research coming out
Okay.
that shows a possible link between taking oral contraceptives long-term and inflammatory bowel diseases like Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis.
Which is kind of a scary thought, to be honest.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's not just those conditions, right?
Right.
We're talking about those. Plus, we talked about the impact on bone health earlier.
Right.
And now this connection to gut health, it really seems like this is something that we don't totally understand yet.
We're definitely still learning.
Yeah.
But it just highlights how important it is to really take a holistic view
Yes,
when you're thinking about health.
absolutely.
It's not enough to just treat an isolated symptom here or there. It's about understanding how everything is working together.
It's like that old saying, you are what you eat.
Right.
But maybe it's really more like, you are what your hormones are doing.
Yeah, I like that. And speaking of hormones, we haven't even touched on the potential impact that oral contraceptives can have on brain function,
Oh, right.
which some of the research also looked at.
Yeah, that's a whole other layer of this.
Oh, totally.
Because our brains basically run on chemicals, right?
They do.
So if you're putting in different chemicals, it's going to have an effect.
For sure. And our brains, they really rely on that delicate balance of hormones.
Right.
And if that balance gets disrupted, It can definitely have ripple effects.
Yeah.
There have been some studies that suggest that oral contraceptives, especially the ones that mess with testosterone levels,
Right.
could actually have an impact on things like your brain function, your mood, your cognitive abilities, how well you think.
Which is kind of mind-blowing when you think about it.
It really is. It's amazing, isn't it, how much hormones influence
Yeah.
every aspect of our health and well-being.
And it makes you wonder how much of what people experience, like, we hear about people having fatigue, low libido,
Yeah.
how much of that could actually be related to the pill?
That's a really good question.
Uh,
And it's important to say that everyone's different.
Right.
Everybody reacts to medication differently, so there's no one-size-fits-all answer.
Right.
But is it possible that those hormonal shifts that we see with the pill could be playing a role?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right.
It's definitely something to consider. Like, for example, if somebody's dealing with a lot of fatigue and they find out their testosterone levels are lower than they should be,
Right.
well, it's worth exploring. Maybe those two things are connected.
Yeah, like, are we looking at all the pieces of the puzzle here
Exactly.
to see how they fit together?
It's not always easy or obvious,
Right.
and it requires you to be a little bit of a detective yourself.
Totally. And it also makes me think it's so important to find a healthcare provider who's willing to do that with you,
100%.
who's willing to be that detective
Yeah.
and not just say, oh, that's normal, it's fine.
Absolutely. And you know what? You are your own best advocate.
Yes.
So don't be afraid to seek out a second opinion
Yeah.
or to look for alternative approaches if something doesn't feel right for you.
Exactly. And speaking of alternative approaches, I'm really curious to dig a little deeper into bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, or BHRT, as I've seen it shortened.
Yeah.
What is that, and how is it different from the traditional hormone therapy we've been talking about?
Okay, great question.
It does sound kind of sci-fi, like something out of a movie.
Right.
Is it as futuristic as it sounds?
It might sound that way, but it's actually a really natural approach to hormones.
Okay.
So BHRT, that stands for Bioidentical Hormone Replacement Therapy.
Okay.
And it's all about using hormones that are basically identical to the one your body naturally makes.
So not the synthetic hormones that we've been talking about.
Exactly. No synthetics here.
Yeah.
BHRT uses hormones that actually come from plants.
Oh, interesting. Plants make hormones too.
They do. Like yams and soy are common sources.
Huh. Who knew?
Yeah, and then these plant hormones, they get tweaked a bit in a lab
Okay.
to perfectly match the chemical structure of the hormones your body's used to.
Wow. So it's like giving your body a message in its own language, right? Instead of trying to get it to understand a foreign one.
Exactly. And that's one of the big differences between BHRT and traditional hormone therapy.
Okay.
Because traditional hormone therapy, they often use those synthetic hormones that we talked about.
Right.
And they don't interact with your body in the exact same way.
Right. It's like trying to talk to someone in French when they only understand Spanish.
Exactly.
You got it.
Even if the message is good, it's not going to get through the same way.
Right.
I read that BHRT is often customized to each person's needs. How does that work?
Yeah, that's a big part of what makes it so great.
Because it's not one size fits all.
Right.
It's not like here's the standard dose, everybody gets the same thing.
Right.
Practitioners who use BHRT, they take a much more personalized approach.
So they're trying to figure out what your body specifically needs.
Exactly.
Not just what everybody gets.
They'll look at your symptoms, what your medical history is like, your lifestyle, all that stuff.
Wow.
And even your preferences, like how you want to take the hormones to figure out the best way to do it.
That's amazing. It's like having a custom-made suit for your hormones.
Right.
So it sounds like finding the right practitioner is pretty important here.
It really is.
Like, you wouldn't just go to any doctor for this.
You want somebody who really knows what they're doing, for sure.
Right. Because this is a little more specialized.
Yeah, it's a bit more niche.
Our research mentioned naturopathic physicians and these A4M trained hormone experts. What is A4M?
It stands for the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine.
Oh, yeah.
But basically, both naturopathic doctors and those A4M trained folks, they tend to have a really good understanding of how everything in the body works together.
Right.
They think more holistically.
Okay.
And they often have extra training specifically in BHRT.
Got it.
So they're more likely to really look at the big picture.
Not just zero in on one thing.
Exactly.
Like they're looking at the whole tapestry,
Right.
not just one little thread.
And that's really what it's all about at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Finding someone who's going to listen to your concerns, really figure out what's going on,
Yeah.
and then work with you, like a partnership, to come up with a plan that feels right for you.
That's great. And it sounds like that's really the big takeaway here when it comes to hormones. There's no magic solution that works for everybody.
No magic bullet, unfortunately.
Darn it.
I know. I wish there was. It would make things a lot easier.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's why it's so important to learn about this stuff.
I agree.
And that's why I really wanted to do this deep dive today.
Yeah, it's been great.
Because we've gone beyond just the surface level, you know?
Totally.
We've really dug into the differences between those natural hormones and the synthetic ones.
Right.
Talked about how the pill can actually impact your body, not just in terms of preventing pregnancy.
Yeah.
And I think really highlighted why it's so important to find a healthcare provider who understands that everybody is different.
It's all about that personalized approach.
It really is. It's been such an interesting conversation.
It has.
We've covered so much. Different hormones, what they do, common myths we hear all the time, and then different ways to actually address these issues.
Right, because knowledge is power.
Oh,
right?
yes.
Especially when it comes to your health. So don't be afraid to ask questions. You know,
Yeah.
if something doesn't feel right, talk to your doctor, get a second opinion, all of that.
Advocate for yourself.
Exactly. You deserve to feel your best.
That's a great place to leave it.
Yeah.
Until next time, everybody keep asking questions and we'll keep digging deeper into all this fascinating stuff.
Sounds good.